I'm sorry, yes, the reason you are blind and the reason you are deaf and the reason that you have these abnormalities and the reason why you're in a wheelchair is because we decided not to vaccinate you. Hello and welcome to A Doctor's View, a podcast looking at everyday health topics and life through a doctor's eyes. Please note that all opinions are my own and should not replace the advice given to you by your own doctor. I'm Dr. Bolivios. Let's begin. Hello, in this episode I'm going to be discussing the vaccination and autism controversy. So this has been a movement or a controversy that's been going around for some time now, and I'm going to explain the reasons why it started and also the dangers in which it brings to our new generations and also our current population at present. So I'm going to discuss what the importance of the MMR vaccine is and what the MMR vaccine is, as well as its schedule and the risks of not vaccinating your children and some of the health implications it can have. So to start with, what is the MMR vaccine? Well, it is a single injection that protects against measles, mumps and rubella. A full course needs to be 2 doses, and the typical schedule would be that the first injection is given to babies as part of their routine vaccination schedule, usually within a month of their first birthday. The second injection is usually before starting school at around 3 years, 4 months. And there are some variations to this. So, for example, babies can have it from 6 months old if they have been exposed to measles or if there is a current measles outbreak. And there's also some other variations which I won't go into, but they are on the NHS website if you want to look them up. So why is it important that we vaccinate our children against measles, mumps and rubella? So all of these diseases can have very, very severe health implications and severe complications as well. So for measles, for example, this can cause ear infections, can cause respiratory problems, can cause seizures, and it can cause meningitis. So in some cases, measles can cause death, and you can develop a fatal degenerative brain condition within 8 years of getting measles. Mumps can cause deafness, and sometimes it can involve a partial recovery, sometimes a complete recovery. And you can get swollen, painful testicles, you can get miscarriages in pregnant women, and also meningitis as well. Rubella, again, this can cause inflammation to the brain, can affect your blood clotting, it can affect pregnant women, it can cause miscarriage, can cause major health problems for their babies, such as blindness, deafness, heart problems, brain damage. You can develop what's called congenital rubella syndrome, and there are cases where babies have been born both blind and deaf as well. So these are very, very serious complications, and not something to be taken lightly. Given all of these complications that I've just discussed, and there are more, you'd have thought it would be absolutely by the by that everyone would vaccinate their children. Surely you'd want to protect them against these awful, awful complications that these very, very severe diseases can have. Well, as it turns out, no, that is not the case. So there has been this Anti Vax movement that has gained quite a lot of traction through social media, through Facebook, through Twitter, through even WhatsApp. And these are a group of people that are proclaiming, based on a paper which I'll discuss in a moment, that vaccines are bad for you. They cause autism along with other things. And this is complete and utter rubbish. Absolute rubbish. And I'm going to explain why. So this whole thing started off in 1998 by a gastroenterologist called Andrew Wakefield. And this was a chap who created or conducted a study, and I use that term loosely, conducted a study that established a link between vaccinating your children and developing autism. This study was then taken at face value by certain tabloids. It was broadcast very publicly, and no one ever actually looked into the evidence or the paper at the time. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to explain what actually happened. So what wasn't explained was that this paper was done with financial gain in mind. Andrew Wakefield was approached by lawyers who funded this study, and these lawyers had been engaged by parents who had children with autism, who wanted to sue the drug companies, believing that there was they were the responsible people behind their child developing autism. Never mind the fact that autism is likely to be detected at the same time, around the same age that these kids would have been given the vaccine. But anyway, so you had a group of parents who wanted to sue the drug companies and were engaged by these lawyers, and they needed some ground in order to do so. They then approached Andrew Wakefield and essentially paid huge amounts of money to allow him to conduct this study, again, a loose term, to prove, essentially, that vaccines cause autism. The findings of this study, the study sample was 12. This, in scientific terms, is absolutely ludicrous as a study sample for something, especially so important. You cannot form quality data using a study sample so small. It is not a randomized control trial, which is the gold standard. It was simply study subjects were picked and chosen, and essentially the data was molded to fit the end game, which was to prove that vaccines cause autism. This despicable man, I should say, has since been struck off. His study has been retracted, and unfortunately, the devastating effects that this pseudo study has had is still going on, and we're still having the repercussions of this. So, for example, it's just in the first 3 months of this year, 2019, there's been a 300% rise in the case of measles, according to global cases in measles, according to the WHO. And even in 2017, this has caused 110,000 deaths. These are not insignificant numbers. And unfortunately, there is still this anti vax movement that is going ahead and still scaremongering parents who are, whether they realize it or not, are doing the wrong thing. To actively choose to not vaccinate your children against these very severe diseases is nothing short of child abuse. It's absolutely criminal. I can't see how you can look at it in any other way. This is my opinion, of course. But it just beggars belief, really. And since then, there have been so many studies that have had to rectify the damage that has been caused by this absolute farce of a paper, by this despicable man who did nothing more than just earn a pretty penny from falsifying research and from concluding wrong conclusions from nothing, really, when you read his study. And for example, I'll give you some examples of studies that have been done since. So there was one in 2014, and this was a meta-analysis. So what it did was it looked at, it summarized all the available evidence at the time from case control, cohort studies in a number of different journals. And it took all the data from all these studies and collated them to make it, for want of a summary of the evidence. And the highlights of this paper were that in 1.25 million cases, this is versus Andrew Wakefield's 12, okay, 1.25 million. The highlights were there was no relationship between vaccination and autism. There was no relationship between vaccination and ASD, that's autistic spectrum disorder. There was no relationship between autism or ASD and MMR. There was no relationship between autism, ASD, and thimerosal, which is something they're saying is contained within the vaccines. There was no relationship between autism and ASD and mercury, another thing that anti-vaxxers love to throw in. So the findings of this meta-analysis suggest that vaccinations are not associated with the development of autism or autism spectrum disorder. And that was in 1.25 million cases analysed. Now, most recently, earlier this year, so it's a 2019 study, there was, and this one is a bit more well known. This was a Danish study, and this involved over 500,000 children. 650,000 Danish children, and they were on average around 8 years old. And like I say, this was in 2019. The basic results of this study was that from a total of 657,461 children, a total of 6,517 children developed autism. That's a rate of around 1 in 100. So what that means is the results were similar when grouping children according to their age, whether or not they had received childhood vaccinations. So there was no increased risk in developing autism if you had received your MMR vaccine. The results were the same. The risk ratio was the same. They go on to say that even if you look at the subgroups, so boys more commonly get autism than girls. When looking at subgroups of boys with siblings with autism and other high-risk factors for autism, the researchers still found there was no link with the MMR vaccine. So the researchers concluded that the study strongly supports that the MMR vaccine does not increase risk of autism. It does not trigger autism in susceptible children and is not associated with clustering of autism cases after vaccination. That was a study of over 600,000 children. Again, comparing that to Andrew Wakefield's 12 of a study of financial gain. It is absolutely ludicrous to think that this study actually had any purpose for grounds in the beginning, and the repercussions of which, like I say, we are still dealing with today. I've heard so many different things, actually, even by patients, saying things like, "Well, why they need vaccinations? They'll fight it off with their own immunity. We didn't have vaccinations before." It's like, yes, we didn't have vaccinations before, and people died from this. People developed huge problems with this. They developed complications, including deafness, blindness, encephalitis, meningitis. All these things, they occurred, and they actually had to live with these conditions. And in some cases, it caused miscarriage. In some cases, it caused birth defects. All these things that you then have to explain to your child later on in life. God forbid that they were to develop them. I'm sorry, yes, the reason you are blind and the reason you are deaf and the reason that you have these abnormalities and the reason why you're in a wheelchair is because we decided not to vaccinate you. How can you possibly explain that as a responsible parent? How? It's child abuse, absolute child abuse. To think that you can take a tabloid headline on such a flawed study and conclude that this is the safe thing to do, and and even worse than this are the anti-vaxxers who are actively campaigning on social media platforms, and in some cases, even they go to even further extents. I read a report. I can't say how accurate it is, but it seems to be pretty plausible, and there was photographic evidence of this. Read a report that a child had ordered a children's book was ordered from an online retailer. It arrived, and inside was an anti-vax leaflet. And if you're going to this extent to portray this false and and self-righteous message, which is incorrect and putting people's lives at risks. And I've also heard the argument of, well, if everyone's getting vaccinated, why do I need to do it? I'll be protected. It doesn't work like that. In order to provide what's called herd immunity, so the number of people needed to say that we are now immune to this disease or this condition, you need to require a 95% cohort of people being vaccinated. And the reason we do this is because it's protecting the people that cannot be vaccinated. It's protecting the immune deficient. It's protecting the pregnant women who cannot receive vaccines. It's about protecting the vulnerable. We don't tolerate much as a society when it comes to our children. Thinking about it, we wouldn't tolerate it if we saw a child being given cigarettes. We wouldn't tolerate it if we saw a child being given alcohol. Yet we do seem to tolerate it when we see a child being denied a basic, cheap, and on the NHS free vaccination that can potentially save their lives. It's I find this quite astonishing. We need to stand up to these groups. This ideology that we can get away with allowing nature to take its course and allowing our own bodies to do things that history shows us, and in some cases now even the present is showing us we cannot do. Our bodies are wonderful, magical things. They do things that are so complicated it's incomprehensible at times. But we now have the medicine, we now have the technology, we now have the research to be able to protect ourselves from the most dangerous conditions, the things that can provide huge complications to our children and to our current cohort now. And we're not taking it based on awful evidence in the past. We're talking about a paper from 1998. And despite all the evidence, all the studies, the millions of study samples, we're still listening to people who are talking nonsense with no science at all, or at least no accurate science to back up their claims. And despite all the irrefutable evidence we have in front of us, it's available for anyone to access. You can go and read these papers to show that there is no link between vaccinations and autism. These studies have been done at huge costs, at huge time, huge levels of research. And despite this, we still have not got the message through, even to these anti-vax campaigners who just keep going on and on about all the dangers of vaccinating your children with, like I say, no evidence whatsoever, other than to cause, I don't know what I don't understand, actually. I was hoping to come up with some form of explanation. I think that they just live in a different world where they think this ideological society is gonna exist. Just wake up, grow up. It's not going to happen. Thankfully, I believe that there are some platforms that are now social media platforms, that are now doing their best to try and ban these anti-vax adverts. I think YouTube's banned any anti-vax adverts, and I think Facebook's been recently under pressure to stop allowing these anti-vax campaign movements to go on to people's timelines. Messages are still have been appearing in WhatsApp. I've read that recently. So there is this drive, at least, or the companies are being put under pressure to try and eliminate this false news or this false data, which is a good thing. But unless we take responsibility ourselves to not be swayed by these false arguments and these bunch of idiots, we won't win, or they will continue to gain traction. So I leave it up to you. The evidence is out there for everyone to see. There's nothing that is made up. It is all there. It's irrefutable. There is, like I say, according to the evidence, no link between autism and the MMR vaccine, even if you are a high risk of autism. And that's it. There is no excuse, really, not to vaccinate your children. So please, I implore you, do the responsible thing. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Dr. Bolivios. If you do have any topics that you'd like me to discuss and research, then please feel free to email me in the description of this podcast. And as always, take care of yourselves and look forward to joining you again next time. Goodbye.